So once again, today's session, it's not going to be a pure lecture. It'll be combined lectures plus brainstorming. Will be about innovating about innovation. In other words, developing a theory of innovation based on the assignment that I gave last week and based on uh, based on what we're going to view today. So we're going to view two videos today, two video lectures on theories of innovation. So I'll share the screen now. And let's begin. This video is around 24 minutes.
An Austrian economist back in the 1930s who introduced and focused in on the problems associated with innovation, but also highlighted its importance and its role in the economic system. Schumpeter had quite interesting ideas about innovation, and it's well worthwhile spending time looking at what his ideas were. He was a minister in government there, but also a noted economist, and has made a long-term contribution to economic theory, and is well worth looking up sometimes if you've got some spare time and looking at his works. So Schumpeter's theory. Well, he was an Austrian economist, as I said, who introduced his theory on innovation management during the 1930s. Schumpeter emphasized the importance of innovation in organizations. And the organizations in this case could be industrial or commercial. It was simply looking at the importance of innovation in the organization. The type of organization was not relevant. Schumpeter's publication on capitalism, socialism, and democracy focused on the concept of what he called creative destruction. Now, I want to spend a little time talking about this idea of creative destruction and see what it means. Organizations must continue to innovate in order to drive profits. Organizations exist in competitive situations, let's say, and the competitors are constantly looking for angles and different ways of producing their product and altering their product to make it more acceptable to customers. So that thereby they will cut their costs and also generate more sales. So the competitors are doing it. This forces the company to do it. So all the companies are trying to, in a sense, out-innovate each other. They're trying to be more innovative than each other, making products which are more interesting to the customers and therefore giving themselves more opportunity to survive in the market. So the really successful innovators are the ones who are going to lead the market. The companies that are less successful in innovation may go out of business. Innovation is the driving force which results in economic change, causing creative destruction. So we only get economic change if we've got innovation. Now we know the world in which we live is typified by economic change. We have new products coming out every day. We have different ways of working and different ways of living. But all of this is the outcome from the innovative process. The innovative process within companies, their desire to produce something new that will be a novelty, will be interesting to the consumer, the consumers will purchase it, and thereby the companies will generate more revenue for themselves. Schumpeter explains economic development and assumes a perfectly competitive economy which is in stationary equilibrium. Now, it's difficult to explain this completely without reference to economic theory. In economics, in terms of market structure, there is one particular one which is quite relevant here, which is the theory of perfect competition. Now, perfect competition, whether it exists or not, does not interest us. It is the state in which there is maximum competition. And therefore, all the companies who are producing identical products, all the companies have identical cost structures, they're all fighting for their existence. And in the long run, they will all settle to earning very little profit, just enough profit to keep them in the business, to keep them producing, just enough. And all of them will make the same profit because all of them are producing essentially the same good. It's been sold at the same price. So all of them will have roughly the same sales. Now, you really need to have a look at the material on perfect competition that we've put on the web for you to consult to get an understanding of what's going on here. But essentially, Schumpeter said, well, the economic development, and it assumes that there is a perfectly competitive economy. There are no monopolies. There's no oligopolistic firms or monopolistically competitive firms. This is pure competition. So all the issues, the other issues, are sidestepped. Schumpeter was looking purely at the extreme in competition. And if that extreme in competition was to come about, he called it the stationary equilibrium. This is the point where all the companies will produce the same amount, deliver the same price, generate the same profits, because the products are identical. The consumers cannot decide between one or the other. There's an assumption that there's no transport cost or no obstacles to the customers understanding the product, or there's no differentiation of the product through advertising, psychic differentiation, or physical differentiation of the product, because companies can't afford to differentiate their products. So the whole system comes into this competitive equilibrium, which he called the stationary equilibrium. So a stationary economic state is referred to as the perfect equilibrium, in which there is no profit, no interest rates, no savings, no investment, and no voluntary unemployment. Involuntary unemployment, I should say. In other words, we've got rid of the world in which we know it, the normal commercial world in which we live. This is an abstraction. This is a purely theoretical point. It's looking at a world where there is pure competition and looking at the effects of this intense competition. And the effects of this intense competition is to drive the prices down, and each producer is fighting for its survival. Each organization is fighting for its survival. So there's no profit. In fact, there is a profit in terms of economics. It's called normal profit. In other words, it's making enough profit to just keep it in production. We say no profit, we mean no excess profit, no supernormal profit. It's just making what economists call normal profit. Normal profit is just enough to keep the business going, just enough to keep it in the market. Anything less and the business will close down. Schumpeter explains this stationary economic state as the circular flow, as he called it, a continuous cycle constantly repeating itself every year. So this system will keep moving in perpetuity because there's nothing to knock it out. There's no external force. So all the companies are in perfect competition. They're all producing identical products. They can't differentiate with advertising or physically differentiate because they haven't got the resources to do so. All the consumers have good knowledge of the market. They know what the prices are. They know where to get it. They know the attributes of the product. So it's like a cycle. It just continuously rolls around, and it's the same all the time, from one year to the next. There is nothing knocking it out. Innovation is the force that is considered spontaneous and a disturbance to this perfect equilibrium. Schumpeter says creative destruction. So what breaks this cycle, this monotonous cycle of competition, and with the same products, the customers get the same products all the time? And what breaks it is innovation. Innovation, according to Schumpeter, is the desire on the part of some producers to try and find the resources, to try and find a way to improve the product and break out of that cycle. And if they do, then they're going to break the whole cycle. They're going to break that whole market situation. And this is called creative destruction. Schumpeter explains, creative destruction is the innovative process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old, incessantly creating new ones. So it's creative destruction is caused by innovation. It's innovation that breaks this endless cycle of competition, which is the extreme form of the model that we would now know as perfect competition. And it's well worth spending some time just looking up our material on perfect competition, so you will see what the underlying assumptions of that model are. But all of them are really ones I've touched on here. The producers make normal profit. In other words, they just make enough profit to keep themselves in business. They all produce identical products because they can't afford to differentiate. There's no advertising. All the prices are the same. Each firm will produce the same amount of output. Competition will pull all of them in that direction. And what breaks the cycle is some of them will make this extreme effort, despite the lack of resources, will make this extreme effort to innovate, to introduce something new. And when they introduce something new, then they've got a different product. In fact, they're the only ones with that product. So in a sense, they become monopolists. They're the only ones producing that product. They've broken the cycle, they've broken away. But now the others see that company making abnormal profits, as they're called, or supernormal profits. And they want to copy, so they will also try to innovate. And this is how this idea of the circular flow will break down. This is the essence of creative destruction. So what is innovation? Well, Schumpeter defines innovation as new product introduction, like I just described. Companies have an incentive to make new products and to introduce new products to try to generate more sales, to become at least temporary monopolists. They're the only ones selling this particular product that has this particular set of attributes. So it's new product introduction. It's also new production methods and processes, trying to cut the costs within the business and thereby making more profits available. And those extra profits could then be used, of course, for innovation. Innovation looking for further cost-cutting measures within the business or innovating the product. Looking for new market opportunities. Looking for alternatives to try and break out of that cycle of competition that I just described, which is that fierce competitive model with emphasis totally on competition, ignoring customers' lack of choice or the fact that the product is very standardized, and ignoring the monotony of the whole situation. Looking for new market opportunities, trying to introduce new products or introduce something new into the market to try and break away from that endless cycle of competition. A new approach for sourcing and supplying raw materials or semi-manufactured goods. So trying to get raw materials by negotiating discounts or trying to do some sort of deal with the suppliers and with the shippers, trying to negotiate terms for semi-manufactured goods from other producers and working in collaboration, building alliances, doing, in a sense, anything to escape that cycle of competition. But all of this is leading to innovation. This is why the Schumperian view is that innovation is extremely important in the economy. I mentioned earlier the creation of a monopoly. As soon as a company is almost in that perfectly competitive situation, if only they can modify their product to some extent, then their product will be different from the others, and therefore, by definition, they will have a monopoly. The monopoly will enable them to generate abnormal profits, and the monopoly will enable them to break away from that cycle. And companies would like to make abnormal profits or supernormal profits rather than just eking out a living, eking out an existence, trying to survive. Schumpeter believed all organizations must innovate to sustain growth, market position, and competitiveness. So, heavy emphasis on innovation as a way of bringing about economic growth, the growth of businesses, customers getting new products, buying more, the business is growing. Companies can sustain themselves in the market, they can improve their market position. Their long-term viability is improved by virtue of more sales. And they're more competitive because they're able to engage in marketing and product redesign. So there is an incentive to innovate. Schumpeter explains the key role entrepreneurs play in the development and deployment of new inventions. They are the ones that drive growth, creative destruction, and economic development. So they are the ones who bring about creative destruction, economic development, and economic growth. It's the entrepreneurs who have the ideas for change. And if the ideas for change are good and reap the rewards of extra profits, then that leads to business growth. It leads to more companies trying to follow and innovate, so they will try to grow as well. creative destruction, moving away from that cycle of competitiveness that we described, which, if it were to continue, would mean utter monotony for the consumers who would get the same product continuously, and for producers who could not break away and have to experience low levels of profit, just surviving, an inability to finance anything which is new. So it's the entrepreneurs who bring about creative destruction. But of course, all of this means we have economic development. The entrepreneur is motivated to innovate due to the need to specialize and dominate a new industry. So entrepreneurs they've come up with a good idea, let's say, for a product or a service, but really what they want is rewards. They want to be rewarded with greater profitability for themselves. They don't want to set up a business that's just surviving. They want to set up a business that's highly successful, that will grow and will further finance their ambitions to bring in even further products, perhaps. So entrepreneurs are motivated to develop businesses that have the capacity to grow. There's also the need to showcase their skills and capabilities in order to demonstrate their superiority. Entrepreneurs like to be seen as entrepreneurs. They're the ones who have changed the market. They're the ones who have brought about the products that the rest of us buy. They're the ones who are responsible for the way we live. And some entrepreneurs like to take credit for that and show themselves as the ones who have led the changes in society and have changed the way we all live. The enjoyment of working on activities or hobbies which ultimately provide an economic growth. Entrepreneurs like the challenge, or so the literature would suggest. They like the challenge of what they're doing. They like the idea of coming up with a new idea and then working on it and bringing it to market and seeing it succeed. There is a sense of achievement, not just the profits and the economic rewards. There is a personal sense of achievement. And that is part of the reward that they experience. So in this video, what we've done is we've looked at Schumpeter, we've looked at the idea of creative destruction, we've talked about the circular flow as put forward by Schumpeter, we've looked at the economic model that underpinned it, perfectly competitive model, and there are videos about that available on the course. We've moved away in the end towards looking at innovation as the destructive force, that the force is going to bring about change, economic development, and a higher standard of living and a better life, because we're getting new products, we're getting changing products, and they're making our lives better. And we finally isolated this is all down to the entrepreneur. It's the entrepreneur. And if the idea is good and acceptable, the reward is higher profits for the business, but also for the entrepreneur, and a sense of achievement for the entrepreneur. And that's all we're going to deal with in this video. That's the famous book. If you're passing the library sometimes, have a look at it and just brush through it and see it. It's written in a very nice style. It is accessible, and at some stage on your personal reading list, perhaps in years to come when you have less pressure, you might want to return and have a look at it. But that's what we're going to deal with. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.
Okay, so that was basically the theory that is currently used in academic and business circles regarding a theory of innovation, namely creative destruction, movement away from perfect competition or maximum competition, movement away from the equilibrium, and the central role of the entrepreneur is how we would summarize that. So now we're going to look at another lecture, and then we'll take a break, and we will go into, when we return after the break, into breakout rooms. And I'd like each of the room to brainstorm and come up with their own theory of innovation. A theory, as I mentioned, that both describes as well as potentially predicts how innovation can work individually and in organizations. So let's, and part of this is, you don't want to just repeat my theory. You don't want to just repeat Schumpeter. You want to kind of be some critical aspects, what is maybe different or lacking or a weakness of these theories. So we're going to have one more video.
So I, as a professor of innovation, a professor of management, have been studying innovation for a long time. And I kept looking into the sort of the theories, the practices, the stories of innovation, to try to understand what's going on. How is it that innovation happens? What is it that causes innovation to go forward? What is it that stops innovation? What is going on there? Let me share a couple of the stories, a couple of the insights I had. First problem is there's a ton of books. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of books on innovation. And so that's problematic in some ways because, as a layperson, as a person coming in, as a person who doesn't study this, I don't know my way around. And in fact, I didn't know my way around, and I studied this stuff. I'm a professor of this stuff. I was studying it, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. But through lots and lots and lots of reading, and lots of taking in books and trying to understand them, I began to see a set of patterns. And the patterns were that there were certain kinds of books that were written. So let me sort of say, I go to the library, I check out a bunch of books, I read a bunch of papers, and it sort of occurs to me that what they're talking about in this certain kind of book, they say the problem of innovation is the problem of the individual and their tool set, the way people think. For innovation to happen, you need ideas, and ideas have to be different. So people have to think different in order for innovation to occur. And I thought, that makes sense. You have people like Leonardo da Vinci, Albert Einstein, Niels Bohr, these people who thought differently than everyone else, and by thinking differently, they were able to bring us to a different place. So certainly that must be true. The individual has to enlarge their tool set. However, in my reading, I ran across another kind of book. This book was very interesting. It was written by, sort of a different kind of person. Different people were studying it in different ways. And those people said, first of all, don't listen to those other people, because they're psychologists and they don't know what they're talking about. What really happens is the group. It's a group's culture that matters. Because here, I'll show you. Give me your 10 Leonardo da Vinci's and put them in a room together and have them start brainstorming. Oh, well, we'll use antimatter and they'll use duct tape and they have all these ideas and memory metal and things are going all around. People are having great ideas. And then here's what you do. Have the CEO, the boss, the big chief of the company come in and listen to the brainstorm and say, that won't work. Last person said they got fired. What a terrible idea. Get out of here. Stop wasting time. What happens to innovation? Gone. Maybe the problem of innovation is not the individual thinking different, but maybe it's the groups. When we form groups to make innovations, right, we need other people. They're going to be our customers. They're going to be our helpers. They're going to supply us with money. Maybe that's the problem of innovation. that the group's culture has to support risk. The group's culture has to allow us to play with these ideas. So I was thinking between this individual level view, the psychological view, and the next view, which is what I call the social psychological view, they're very different. They make very different assumptions about what matters. So I thought this was it. But then I ran across another kind of view, another kind of book, another set of literature and research and thinking about innovation. And this group says, you know what? Individuals don't matter and organizations and groups don't matter. At least they don't matter that much. What really matters is the organization. Because if you have an organizational structure that sort of messes things up, that does not allow things to move, that doesn't allow information to go from here to here, if your strategy is about staying still, about sort of reinforcing, about reducing risk instead of about changing new things, you're not going to have innovation. In fact, you think about this, if you make computer chips, it's really different than making potato chips. And there's a complete difference there. What is that? Is that the real reason? Maybe that's the real problem of innovation, that organizations aren't structured in ways to take our ideas and to move them through groups and then to allow us to move the information around to strategically execute our ideas. Maybe that's the problem of innovation. Well, I like to believe that. It's just these three. But in fact, there's more. There's another view by the economists. Sort of, we call it a market-based view. And the market view says, innovation, in order for innovation to be meaningful, it has to be adopted, that people actually have to move it and bring it into their lives. They have to change their life around it. And if the market does not see the utility and value of an innovation, they're not going to adopt it. Maybe it's a creative idea, but if it's not adopted, it is not an innovation. And so we can think about that. There's many, the Segway example I was using before, the market did not see the utility and value of that thing. And so maybe the problem is there. Maybe the problem is in the market. However, there's yet more views. Another view of the society. We talked about human cloning for a moment ago. Maybe the society has to say, that proposition for change you have, we like that, and so we will not make that illegal. We'll let that be legitimate. We, in fact, aspire to that. That's a change that we think makes us better at who we are, makes us better at what we want to be. So maybe that's the secret to innovation, is to find things that society will say, yes, in fact, that's a good thing, that's something we want. However, I was an engineer. I was trained as an engineer. As a young person, I was very young, and there was always a view in engineering that the problem of innovation has nothing to do with people at all. The problem of innovation is that some kind of technology has to be developed and it has to work. Think about it this way. When you do brain surgery, it's hard to keep the body alive. It's just hard. And it's not about individuals or groups or organizations. It's not about society. It's just a very difficult thing to get the oxygen into the hemoglobin and get that through the lungs and get that to the cells. A very difficult thing. So as you look at these, you ask sort of the question, which one is it? Which of these is true? Let me ask you to just take a moment and think about which one of these do you believe is true? Is the problem of why innovation fails the individual? Is it that the person is not challenged to think differently? Is that the problem? Or maybe it's the problem of the group, that new ideas are killed by a group during brainstorms because of members' behaviors. The CEO comes in and does his behaviors. Or maybe it's innovation's killed at the organization level because the organization doesn't consider an innovation as strategic. Or is it the market? Where the industry, the market fails to recognize or respond to an opportunity to make life better? Or is it because that society doesn't accept something as legitimate and society does not support values and aspirations that don't go with it? It has to support us. It has to make us feel better as a society. Or is it technologically that the innovation was just not fully developed? Maybe the innovation is not quite ready for prime time. It's not quite ready to be released into the world. So which one is it? Why does innovation fail? Well, I'm not sure, but let's take a look at some other approaches. So again, what I just talked about was the ways in which the academic literature, the books that we read, talk about innovation. And any innovation book you pull off the shelf can pretty much be slotted into any one or two of these categories here, and it takes that perspective. But now, as I began to look at this, I was thinking about, well, how do I make sense of this? Yeah, they're all true. Of course they're all true. But which one is true when? And which one is more true? So let me tell you a few stories about some other things that had occurred to me as I was doing lots of reading and I was trying to understand what was going on. One thing I came across, I was doing some work with a company called ACH Foods. ACH Foods in Memphis, Tennessee. They have a number of interesting brands. One of their brands is called Mazola. And it's an oil brand, and many countries have Mazola oil. one day I was there, we were working on some innovation projects, and they showed me a product they had come out with. This product is called Pure. So this is Pure, and Pure is interesting because it is 100% fat, it's 100% oil, and it's naturally fat-free. There's no oil in this oil. What does that mean? There's no oil in the oil. How can that be? Well, take a look. If I take a look at the, yeah, look at this. 0 calories, 0 fat, 0 trans fat, 0 cholesterol, 0 sodium, 0 carbohydrates, 0 protein. This stuff's better than water, I guess. No, in fact, take a close look here. Serving size, 1/4 of a second of spray, 0.25 grams. So it seems what they've done is they've made the serving size so small that it falls under the regulations about what fat is, what fat content is. In fact, it is under 1/2 gram of fat per serving. So let me see if I can get 1/4 of a second of spray. Oh, that's not 1/4 of a second of spray. Okay, well, I guess I'm going to get fat if I eat too much of that. So you get the idea there that's one. Let's just take that as an example. Here's another example. This was the first electric car, the Nissan Tama. In fact, we're thinking now, oh, we have all these great electric cars. Here's an old one that was done in the 40s. Why would they have done this car as an electric car? Well, there's some things here that were going on. Think about the time, think about what's going on in the world, think about the availability of natural resources like oil and things like that. It begins to make sense why the Nissan Tama would have been done. Here's another one, the Palm Pilot. Maybe you've seen the Palm Pilot or heard about the Palm Pilot, but let me tell you a little bit about the story of the Palm Pilot. So this Palm Pilot was this device that was formed. Company Apple had been trying in the early 90s to crack this problem, that is to innovate around this problem called handwriting recognition. So their idea is, if I could get people to put things into, let me go grab mine here. If I could get people to do entry into their device with handwriting, that would be very successful. It would be an easy thing, and people could carry it around. Well, it was really difficult to do that. But one person figured it out, and he said, well, why are we making it hard for a computer to recognize handwriting? Because if you think about it, the way people write, sometimes you write this way, sometimes you write that way, sometimes you print, sometimes you're in cursive. There's all these different ways of writing. And so what happens is it's very difficult for the computer to understand. And so this gentleman said, why don't we just, we're acting dumb. This is Jeff Hawkins. We're doing the dumb thing. We're making the computer do the hard thing. Let's just have the person do the hard thing. Let's teach them a new way to write. Let's get everyone to write a new way so the computer can understand it. And in fact, it was very successful. It took about 5 minutes to learn the graffiti drawing language that was here. That was designed to allow the computer to understand it very rapidly. Interesting. This was a very successful product that was only displaced by the BlackBerry, by RIM. And I believe it was probably because RIM had online email, which no one else had. And they had it probably for as much patent reasons as they did for technical reasons. Well, here's another one. This for you in Northern Europe, you might recognize this as a Schnell Imbiss. It's sort of a fast food joint, like the equivalent of a traditional McDonald's. So if you had been in Germany 100 years ago, you might have seen these things. Well, if you wanted to break into this industry, that is to go into the Schnell Imbiss industry, the problem is all the good spots. So this is a food place. They have French fries, they may have sausage, they may have beer, they may have all kinds of things that are interesting to people. And they have it in a place where you walk by. And the problem is the places where you walk by are all taken. The good spots are taken, next to the subway station, next to a soccer stadium, next to they're all taken. And so if you want to move into this industry, it's going to be very difficult to do. Well, someone figured out how to do it, and I present to you the grill walker. The grill walker is a person, they walk around, they have propane on the back, that's the gas in the back, and they have the grill in the front, and they make these sausages, and they walk around and sell them. Man, would you like a sausage? Sir, would you like a sausage? What do you think? This is a pretty good response to the problem of these location monopolies that people had. Why was this successful and the electric car wasn't? Why was this successful and the first MP3 player wasn't? That's been perplexing to me. Well, as I started thinking about this in more detail, I started thinking about, like, why did this thing work? What was what happened that allowed this thing to work? Well, it turns out there were a number of conditions of success, things that had to be true in order for this thing to work. You had to have hungry people, there were certain health codes, there were all these things that I've shown here that have to be true in order for this project to work. But in fact, you see this small area here, the small overlap area, is in fact the area where the current solution is. The current solution solves all these problems. So now somehow the new entrant, the new person in there, has to open up this space in some way that allows for more different ideas for how to solve this problem. And so where there were location monopolies before, by having a person walk around pushing this thing around, we have no location monopolies, and then all of a sudden we're at a place where we can try something different. So in fact, here is something very different. I did a little research on this invention, this company, and it turns out they sell their most sausages. Where do you think they sell the most sausages? So let's say they were in Germany and they are walking around selling sausages. Where would they sell the most sausage? Well, number one is soccer games. Of course, after soccer games and people come out, they're hungry, maybe they've had some beer, they've shouted a whole great deal at the players and at the opposing team. They're hungry, and so they eat it all up. And the second most, it was kind of interesting to me, they said that they sell a lot of sausage at government demonstrations. Of all the places to sell a lot of sausage, I guess that kind of, again, we're shouting at people and doing that kind of thing makes us hungry as well. So here we see how starting with the small, the puny, remember the puny idea? Starting with a small puny idea, if we can just open up that space and open up that space, there's more possibilities for us to innovate in. Same goes for the handheld innovation. So I showed you the Palm Pilot. Well, there are all these things that had to be true. It had to cost a certain amount. We had to have a certain device size. We had to have certain battery life and this processor speed. And all these things had to be true. But the problem was the software was so complex that this thing didn't work. There was not an overlap. And so when Jeff Hawkins came in, he said, well, let's just have the person do the hard part and let the computer do the easy part. By doing that, he created an overlap, and all of a sudden there's a possible solution. So all the conditions of innovation, all these different things that are the conditions, were met. And so innovation was possible. So as I've been thinking about this, I've been finding more and more stories that sort of meet this pattern. There's a story about the Metropolitan Opera and how they went to propose a new project, a new way of letting more people into the space called Live in HD. And so Live in HD, what it is the opera is performed live, and then they videotape. They don't videotape it; they video it and stream the video into a series of movie theaters around the country. And so people in the movie theater can actually watch the opera as it's going. And these are people who might normally go to the opera, people who might not be able to fly to New York and do the opera there. Well, the way this thing came about is interesting. So if you think about what are the conditions under which a successful performing arts program can be put on, it's kind of interesting. So we have things like the board, and of course the board is the governing body of the opera, and they're going to say, well, yeah, we want to do some Mozart, or we're going to do some Wagner, and that's the decision. And so all the choices that we have are inside of that. Then we have a certain stage size and production cost, and all of these things that have to be true in order for this innovation to occur. Well, this one was interesting in that when they first started working on the innovation, in fact, they worked a year into the innovation, that they were working on this for a long time before they realized someone read the contract with the artist that said, basically, you can't do this. So imagine, you work on a project for an entire year, and then you find out you can't do it that way. So my understanding is what they did was they sort of changed, they reconfigured the way that they were talking about it. So they weren't talking about changing the artist contract, changing the union contracts. What they were talking about is about an intellectual property agreement. It's a very different thing. It's a very positive thing. Changing a union contract is negative, and even the language makes you sort of grumpy. But if you say, oh, we're going to do profit sharing, and we're going to have equity, and we're going to do streaming royalties, all of a sudden, it's a very different conversation. It's the same thing, but it's a very different conversation. And so by changing this, they were able to actually get this innovation done. And so in fact, there is now Live in HD through the Metropolitan Opera. Here's another one from the art world. Christo, you may have heard of Christo. Christo loved to wrap stuff and loved to sort of surround things. And here he's wrapped 11 islands. So we had 11 islands. This is off the coast of Miami, Key Biscayne. There's a set of islands there. And so he decided he's going to wrap these things in bright, hot pink polypropylene. Okay, well, why would you do that? Well, okay, that's art. That's why we do it. So if we think about what was hard about doing it, was it hard to think of the idea? Well, let me wrap something. And he's looking around. Maybe he was flying over in a plane. Say, I'll wrap those islands down there. That doesn't seem that hard. But what is hard is getting a bunch of people to help you do this. So this thing required about 400 people, more than 400 people to do. There were, my understanding is about 6.5 million square feet of hot pink polypropylene. Where do you get that? Hello, Home Depot, can I have some hot pink polypropylene, 6.5 million square feet? Yeah, we're going to need a deposit on that, sir. Couldn't imagine doing that. We have to sew it all together. So all these things were sewn. There was flotation devices inside to make them float. Had to be towed into place, and people had to stay there day and night to make sure no one stole them, that the waves didn't carry them away. They had to consult with marine biologists, with mammal experts, with ornithologists, with bird experts to make sure that they weren't hurting anything, even construction engineers to make this happen. So it seems like it would have been a pretty hard thing. But you know what? None of this was hard in compared to the permissions that they had to get. They had to get permission from the governor, they had to get permission from the county, they had to get permission from the Department of Environmental Regulation, they had to get permission from everyone, from all these organizations in order to allow this thing to happen. So what do you think is harder, getting some hot pink polypropylene or getting permission to wrap some islands? Yeah, I'll bet it was the latter that was much more difficult. And in fact, Christo and Jean-Claude in their art talk about the process, the part of the process of this thing is actually getting that permission. That's part of the art that they see. So part of the art is overcoming the constraints that would stop this thing from happening, that is creating the conditions of success. So looking at again and again and again, looking at so many different of these examples, I've been really interested. And again, check out the book if you want to see more specific examples about this. But basically, so the conclusion is, more generally, that there are at least 6 things that I found that will be involved in any innovation you can think of. So again, any innovation you bring me, and I'll show you 6 things that have to be true, 6 conditions that have to be met in order for it to be a successful innovation. The first condition is a creative idea. You need a new idea. If it's the same old idea, it's not creative, it's not innovative, it's not new. So we need a new idea. Okay, and that's what the individual comes with, a new idea. The second thing is you're going to need supportive group, because anything that's interesting is going to involve other people, either as customers, as clients, as helpers, as spouses, as emotional support, as technical support, and so we're going to need supportive group. We're going to need other people. The third thing that has to be true is a execution capability. So it's not enough to have the idea and then have people help us think about what it should be, but we actually have to be able to do the idea. And so I sort of think of this as organizational execution. So we have to organize people into a way that this thing can actually happen, so that this innovation can actually be real in the world. Next, we need a market. We need a place where we can sell this thing. We're in an industry, and we have to be able to sell it faster, better, cheaper than our competitors. And so we need a willing market for our idea, for the innovation. Then we have to make sure the thing is legal. It has favorable regulation. People aspire to it. It doesn't violate some basic ethics or basic morals that we have as a society. And then finally, the thing has to work. And if it doesn't work, it's not innovation. So you can see that all these 6 things actually have to be true, and I argue that these will apply to any problem that you could bring, any kind of innovation problem that you might have. And so that's what this class is going to be about, is about how do we recognize the innovation constraints, and these are, I call these constraints, the conditions of success, the constraints, for any problem that you might bring.
Okay. So let's actually take a break now. We'll return at 10:15, and we're going to go, well, I'll give a little bit of introduction and overview, but we'll go into breakout groups so that you can then come up with your own theory of innovation. We'll spend half an hour in the breakout group. Actually, let's say half an hour, and then we'll come back, and each group will present their theory of innovation. Any questions? We'll start again at 10:15 a.m.